Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is a great crowd and turnout. I'm so happy to see you all here, so thank you so much. My name is Laura Hensley. I'm the Digital Director of Canadian Business, and I'm really excited to be moderating tonight's panel. We have an excellent lineup of experts, so I'm very happy to introduce them. And I would like to also say thank you so much to our partner tonight, Staples. So nearly 3 years into the pandemic, it's been made very clear that hybrid work is here to stay, probably to much of our pleasure. Employers of all sizes are rethinking how and where their people should work, and employees are embracing more flexible models of work as well. In fact, newer modes of flexible work have become crucial for employers and employees when it comes to attracting and retaining talent. And we're going to get into all of that tonight with our excellent lineup of speakers who I will introduce. I'll start at the end here. Tonight we have David Boone, the Chief Executive Officer of Staples Canada. We have Andrew Au, Global Thought Leader on Digital Transformation and Culture Change. Dimitri Iliopoulos, Senior Vice President and Managing Director of Research Services at Angus Reid Group. John Trudakos, a Professor of Organizational Behavior and HR Management, I got that right, at the University of Toronto. And Charlene Theodore, the Chief Inclusion Officer at McCarthy Tétrault. Welcome, everyone. We have a lot to get through, so we'll try to make it as cohesive as possible. But David, let's start with you. So Staples and Angus Reid recently conducted a Future of Work survey, and it found that more than 70% of employees feel flexibility is important, whether that's hybrid or fully remote or various models. In fact, your survey found that more than half of employees would be less likely to consider an employer that doesn't offer flexible models. What do you make of these findings?
There's a lot to unpack there, Laura.
Yes, there was.
That's a big question. So just in the room here, show of hands, who's in a hybrid work or remote work model today? So the vast majority. Who manages people that are in a hybrid or, so again, quite a few folks. So I think that's indicative of the state of affairs, and I think the research and our thought process is that hybrid work is here to stay. And the one thing about Staples, which is a little bit unique, is because we serve consumers. We hopefully serve all of you when you've been, outfitting home offices. But we also serve the largest corporations and governments in Canada. And so we get a bird's eye view just through consumption of products and services as to where people are working and what they're doing. And we have a lot of conversations with our clients. And what I can tell you is hybrid is definitely here to stay. Our view is nobody's quite got it right yet. There's still a lot to be learned. And I think the one thing that we think a lot about at Staples, and I know our customers do as well, we have 12,000 employees across Canada. And when we talk about hybrid work, we are talking about the 800 that historically worked in our home office. The other 11,200 are always on site. They're shipping goods, they're producing materials, they're doing tech support, they're doing something that requires on-site work. And so when we think about the hybrid work model, we're also thinking about our entire workforce and make sure that it's sort of a balanced approach. What I would say, and maybe just one last comment on it, is clearly the pandemic was absolutely remote work for knowledge workers or office workers, right? Go home as soon as you can, and there was government mandates, et cetera. We've been slowly going back into this hybrid work phase, and there's this public and private negotiation going on between employers and employees around what is the right balance of on-site and off-site. And I think what we're seeing, because again, we're talking to virtually every corporation in Canada, is the trend is headed towards a little more on-site, but hybrid is here to stay. So that's kind of our feeling right now, Laura.
And Dimitri, you were involved in the survey as well. What do you think the results show when it comes to workers' values and priorities today?
Yeah, I mean, a lot's shifted, obviously, since the start of the pandemic. And just a quick clarification on the study. We did a study with Staples pretty comprehensive, looking at the current state of work. We talked to knowledge workers or people who typically work in office environments. We also talked to employers to see where the connections are there, where there's a disconnect. And so, really what we're talking about is, flexible location. We're talking about flexible hours and understanding that there's, needs beyond the office. And, if we're going to do a little bit of a level set, the first question during lockdown was, with everybody at home, can we make a company work? Can we still be a productive organization? I think that was answered. But it also gave people a taste for what that lifestyle is like. It's a very, different lifestyle than the 9 to 5 coming into work and that being sort of the status quo. Now with the current dynamic, we're seeing a bit of a shift in the power balance between the employer and the employee. We've all heard about the Great Resignation. We know that people are being very choosy about what they're interested in doing, and so it's actually put the ball a little bit more in the court of the employees in terms of what they're interested in. And what they're telling us through the research is that they're quite happy at home. So if you look at just satisfaction with the working situation, we looked at people who are working remotely or hybrid or fully in the office. People who are working entirely remotely or mostly remotely, 86% saying that they're very satisfied. That's a big, big number for any satisfaction ranking. You look at the people who are mostly in the office, that very satisfied number goes to 36%. And so there's a big trade-off happening there. And the disconnect that's happening is that employers aren't quite on the same page. They actually think that their employees are happier in the office than they actually are. So when it comes to challenges that people are facing just in their work life, the people who are at home a lot less likely to cite any challenges at all, a lot less likely to cite challenges when they're feeling motivated, burnout, which I think we haven't seen the total burnout costs coming out of the pandemic, motivation, morale, all of these things much more likely to be felt for the people in office. And as we were just saying, in terms of a new offer being on the table, if you're not offering some sort of hybrid, remote, or flexible hour type of opportunity, 3/4 of office workers are saying, I'm less likely or much less likely to take that job. So the dynamics shifted quite a bit, and it's really up to agile employers to figure out how to sort of make the peace.
And I'm curious what some changes you've noticed in your own individual workplaces as it pertains to culture. I'll open it up to everyone, but Andrew, why don't you
Sure.
jump in there?
I think what we saw in the pandemic, I mean, our team just became, almost global over in a month or two, where we had people. I know one gentleman on our strategy team, he had to go back to Islamabad because he had, we had family obligations. And traditionally that would have been like, hey, well, I guess, that's maybe is the end of that relationship. And we actually extended that. He's working full time from Islamabad, and we're going to have a team of 10 people down there in probably about a month or so. So I think it's opened up the team to be just more open-minded, more global in terms of the mindset. It's just been a really great shift for us.
Charlene, what about you? I mean, we're talking about law firms earlier. How has your culture changed?
When I speak about kind of the changes I've noticed, I'm speaking not just to law firm culture, but the culture of the clients we serve, right? And that's corporate Canada. The biggest change in the pandemic is that issues with regards to diversity, inclusion, equity, systemic racism were kind of thrust from discussions among the Black community, Indigenous community, other cultural communities, the queer community, to the boardrooms, right? And so even though our CEO doesn't look like me, or your CEO may not be a woman or a racialized person or someone from the queer community, they were all now forced to kind of say, well, how do I grapple with this? That's also not going away. And I think for employers who really leaned into tackling diversity and inclusion in the workplace, I think my word of caution to them would be, we're at a bit of a tipping point right now. We're in a bit of I would say, a dangerous time for all of the efforts that we've all been putting in collectively since 2020, because we are now kind of getting into a rhythm. We're still in hybrid, but we're all here together, right? We don't have that collective focus that a complete lockdown gives us. And, we talked about the Great Resignation and the importance of retaining talent. And that means retaining diverse talent. And so if we don't take the opportunity to lean in and to continue to act on the lessons we learned from the pandemic, people are going to, vote with their feet, right? And go for employers that do offer a better and more inclusive culture.
And that brings me to my next question, which is for you, John. So obviously we know the landscape of the workplace has changed and what employers are looking for has also changed. So what should companies or businesses keep in mind when they're trying to set up successful hybrid strategies?
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest challenges that companies are grappling with still, and they've been grappling with it for probably the last year. I think when we went into the pandemic, it was very obvious what companies had to do in some ways to get through. Now it's, instead of being forced or the no choice, now there's choice, right? So when we look at what companies have to think about, I like to look at it this way. You want to have clear expectations, right? You want to have a very clear plan. And the company has to set those expectations for their employers, but at the same time, they need to know the expectations of the employees, right? They need to know what their employees want and make them part of that conversation. I think a big part of this too is there's going to need to be retraining of leadership. The way people led in 2019 is not the way they're leading now, and they're going to have to lead going into the future. So that's another thing to look at. I'm seeing companies talking about things like re-onboarding, right, where people that got hired in the pandemic didn't have a very satisfying experience getting onboarded. And so even people coming back to new work models are having to learn different ways. And all of this, when we talk about the next step, comes to empowerment, right? We want to empower our people. We think about autonomy. We've come to love our autonomy through this. Flexibility, again, has been mentioned already a couple of times. These are critical factors, and it comes down to trust. Do companies trust their employees? Employees want to be trusted. If you give them that trust, they'll return the favor most of the time in kind. They say, oh, well, how do I know if my employees are performing? Well, you should have data metrics, right, first of all. But second of all, the people who are bad performers not in hybrid, they're probably still the bad performers, and the good performers are probably still the good performers, right? So it's a question of how do you empower your people? And this leads to the big kind of thing that companies are striving for, and that's engagement, right? We're looking for ways to keep our employees engaged with each other, with our organizations, with our leaders. And this, to me, is kind of the holy grail for a lot of companies. And if hybrid's done right, and you've got to care about the setup employees have, right? You've got to give them a healthy work environment. And health isn't just, it's mental health, it's physical health. Do they have the right tools they need to not have a backache every day sitting on their couch when they're at home, right? Showing them that you care, creating work environments that they're engaged with, that they want to be there, right? Reinventing your office so it's a statement place for your employees, right? And when they go there, there's a purpose, right? That's what gets people engaged, the people they work with, the work they do, and all those things tie in, I think. And these are things that companies are thinking about and are going to have to think about very intentionally going forward.
And part of staying connected, obviously, is technology and engaged. Technology helps us stay engaged, especially in hybrid or remote environments. But technology throughout the pandemic has also allowed workers like parents, especially women, or those with different physical or mental needs, an ability to work successfully from home in a way they maybe hadn't before. We talk a lot about inclusivity and making sure we're being inclusive, but why is that technology piece so important, Charlene, when it comes to making sure those workers are, adequately supported at home?
Yeah, that's a great question. One specific piece of technology that I love that just really helps in a remote environment, and also I think a great equalizer when it comes to EDI, are work allocation systems. So however that may fit within your work environment. Pre-pandemic, people who worked in the EDI space, heard a lot from women, people of color about these informal networks, right? Going out for dinner after drinks, maybe it's a bit of a boys' club, and opportunities and work opportunities to be front-facing in front of clients would come out of those. Now that we're in this remote hybrid environment, there's a way to really equalize, right? To make sure that everybody has access to opportunities, and there are technological ways that people can say, not only do I want access to this opportunity, this is where I'd like to learn more on, right? This is an area I'd like to maybe get some opportunity or some mentoring. I think it's a great technological tool. I know it's saved a lot of companies and a lot of law firms during the pandemic to make sure that work got done, but it also really, really helps level the playing field for EDI. And the other piece I would speak to specifically for women in the workplace, there's a great organization called the Prosperity Project that highlighted the disproportionate effect that the pandemic had on women and the gendered economy, with more women leaving the workplace or considering leaving the workplace. When it comes to, I really appreciate what you had to say about give your employees the tools that they need to do their best work. When it comes to women specifically, don't be afraid to have conversations around parenting and what supports that they may need, and be flexible around that, because not everyone is working from home in this lovely den of silence on the great chair that John told you to buy. In meeting with women throughout the pandemic, I've met everyone's children. I've seen cats. I've seen screaming babies. I've seen people changing diapers. We're not going to change the dynamic of parenting within that family dynamic, but what we can do is provide that outreach and support with the knowledge that our women employees have. The most of them have some extra duties to take care of at home,
I think
no matter how supportive their partners are.
I think you make a really great point. We saw data, right, that said that women were the most penalized, like you kind of said. And boundary permeations, which is this phenomenon of like where your boundaries kind of overlap the most and one bleeds into the other, that is way more of an issue for women. And we've seen that in the pandemic. So you're 100% right. Like those tools, anything you can have those conversations, create that environment is so critical, I think.
I think it's really about, are you as an employer focused on the deliverables or the time in which the work gets done, that 9 to 5, right? If I'm giving you a stellar report on time, on deadline, what does it mean to you that I took the afternoon off to make sure my kids got a COVID test, or take my kid to school because they're nervous about going back to school for the first time in person, right? And also, if you didn't have, we could have a whole conversation on ERGs, employee resource groups, but if you don't have a women at work, Black employees at work, South Asian employees at work, whether they're solely community spaces or they're allyship focused, now's the time to establish those networks, and those can also be done remotely.
I think the pandemic has brought some interesting insight to all this, in that we all went through this starting from shell shock and then dealing with it for how long. And it made us all, vulnerable in different ways, and having to address a new set of needs, whether we had, children in the house and whatnot. And so, aligned with that, we also had this forced adoption of Zoom and video conferencing. And so it actually changed, I think, our societal norms about what's professional and what's acceptable. And I have a coworker. I feel like I saw that coworker's baby grow up on his knee over the last couple of years. I've had my child like pulling on my hair while I'm trying to talk to a client. So and now that's much less of a deal breaker, whereas before that used to be a viral video, and now that's just a Tuesday right now. So I think it's really changed the norm right now.
I think what's interesting to me, I could jump in on any one of these topics because we have a lot of passion. I have a lot of passion around it. You mentioned tools, John. I was thinking about how many people here love hybrid meetings, where somebody's on the screen and a bunch of people in the room. Well, there's a couple back there in the
Very
corner,
excited
they
people back
probably
there, yes.
sell the technology to make it work. But there is definitely there are a lot of little things that just don't go right in this model. You're sitting around the meeting room table and, so-and-so isn't in today. We forgot that. We got to get them on the screen. Screen's not connected right. Getting these processes right, I believe, is actually quite important for people in a hybrid model. Otherwise, the hybrid thing's not going to work because people are going to get frustrated. Employees are going to say, forget it, I'll be remote. Employers are going to say, forget it, everybody come in, right? So I think we've got to make sure some of those things get solved. And then, we're spending a lot of time, and I think somebody said it was around the culture of the organization, right? And the quote, and John and I have talked about this, pre this panel, is that, human well-being is directly related to quality social interactions. And I hadn't really heard that until about 6 months ago. And every audience I've talked to about, it connects with them, right? And you think about all the challenges during the pandemic we've had with people that are alone or whatever. And I think the same has applied to our employees. And, I used to do a little bit in diversity, and I think, boy, for knowledge workers, this is the most flexible work environment we've had in thousands of years, ever. Like, it's never been this flexible, right? We have technology, we're at home, we can go in the office. So why is there all this burnout? Like, why are people reporting all these challenges? And the only conclusion I can come to is that we've, probably had the trauma of COVID, but also these quality social interactions that maybe you don't even know you're getting from the work environment are just not coming in the right way at the pace. And so that leads me, I think there was a lot of leaders in the room. We're trying to think a lot about in our company, and I know our clients are, like, what kind of culture do we want? And that's got to involve some on-site stuff. And sometimes it involves your associates being on-site just to be there for other associates. And maybe they go back to you and say, look, I was there all day and nothing happened. But, you were there and you were part of the team and the community. And that's how we're starting. I think that's how companies got to start thinking about how they manage this hybrid thing.
I was just going to say, I think the challenge in a predominantly remote environment is that, you mentioned it, work becomes so transactional. It's like you're there for a meeting, you get what you need, and then you're out. So you lose the social capital that you've built and the sense of community. So that's got to be purposely rebuilt for a hybrid environment.
And that kind of goes to, how are your organizations developing their back to work plans? I mean, David, you're talking a lot about what did and didn't work during COVID and remote. So I'd be really curious to hear how Staples is, implementing its back to work policy.
Right. So, I'd say through the pandemic, we consistently followed sort of health guidance, right? We did not want to be an outlier around sort of pushing to do something different. We did conclude that hybrid was going to be a work model for our knowledge workers. And we went out initially with a set of guidelines that said X percent of time on site, 30 to 70%. And then we sort of came up with a strategy. It was very well thought out by my team and lots of conversations with others around moments that matter, being in the office, and trying to do that at an individual team level. I think what we learned is two things. One is the guidelines needed to be codified more to make it a little more consistent, right? So people couldn't, you guys can all process this, but for some reason in a large organization, when you say 30 to 70%, translating that into 2 days or 1 day is actually what you need to do, just to make it easier for folks to sort of get a lot of clarity. I think the second thing we learned, and we're in this right now, is if you have each individual department set all of their own parameters, well, then you're in that trap where this department was in that day and they said, well, it was a waste of time because nobody from the marketing team was there, nobody from merchant, whatever finance was not in, that wasn't their day. And so we're in a process now of saying, well, let's work through with each area. When will you be in? When will you not be in? What are the overall moments that matter that everybody's in? And we've done a lot of classification of roles to make it, to operationalize it is probably the best way I would say it. And I would say, most reaction to that is pretty good. And we do have some folks that are saying, hey, I want to be remote all the time. And our position is, well, we're a hybrid company. That's the culture we want. So the people that are going to work here are generally going to work on-site and off-site. And, primarily remote isn't our culture.
Dimitri, how about your workplace? Can you give us some insights as to how you've been navigating that?
We've really taken an employee-led approach. We haven't mandated anybody back to work, and just to take a quick detour into the results, we do actually see that, some employers are designating this many days and that you have to come in. Some employers are saying these are the days that you have to come in, while other employers, I think it's something like 40% of employers are saying that it's entirely, those decisions are entirely made by the employee. And we're still, experimenting at this point, but with the focus of really, creating an environment where, we see more and more people coming into the office because there is that, growing collaboration. And I think that quality, those quality engagements like you were talking about. And, I think what we're trying to emphasize more to understanding those quality collaborations, engagements, is we're creating more event type of meetings where there's a purpose to get together. There's a reason to have these quality engagements, and so there's a little bit more planning around the executive level to make those things happen.
I think one of the big things too, and from the companies I've worked with and from even hearing what's being said here, is you've got to have a reason for people to be back in, right? So as the managers, as the leaders, just to say, well, because I want you, there. Well, people are like, well, that's great, but is it culture? Is it because there's a creative process you feel you need? Is it a collaboration issue, right? The social thing's a big factor that people lose out on, right? Especially when you look at people who come in new to an organization. Yeah, if you've been there 10 years, sure, you have your network, you know who to go to for the problems. If you've been there got hired in the pandemic, you probably don't know who anybody is in the company, right? And how do you get those people on the career trajectories they need to have? So part of that is that give and take, I think. And there is, from my data, there's no right or wrong model at this point. This is why we're kind of in this messy period where people are figuring it out. But you've got to have that plan, I think is what I'm hearing, and a reason for your company to do things a certain way and what you're going to tell your people.
And, many employees, probably most of the people here too, feel that working from home allows them to get things done. They might be less interrupted. They can be more productive. In fact, the survey that you conducted found that employees are becoming so accustomed to working from home that 50% say they're concerned now about being in an office and being too distracted. It sort of seems like another problem added onto this confusion. But Andrew, do you think that, this is something that employers are considering in their plans, making sure that employees actually feel like they can get real work done and aren't going to be forced to just make small talk, all the time?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think it goes back to what John said though, because I think we got to think about what is the purpose or the role of the office going forward. And if you're asking people to come in to literally just do what they would have done sitting at their desk at home, that's not a good use of time, right? That's not a purposeful use of the office. So from what we're hearing is that people want to go in the office for the social connections, to build networks and build that sense of community and the culture, or to sprint through a really tough problem. And so I think that you've got to make it worth it for people to come back to the office. And it can't be the same as what they're doing at home. So it's more than just productivity.
I also think employers I think it's their responsibility to be a little bit directive in that sense. You can engage employees and, we've held contests, we've held things where we've been really directive about coming into the office, so we plan around an event. I think when it comes to hybrid, people focus sometimes exclusively on the remote experience, but hybrid is two experiences. So for our leaders in the room, you've got two things on your plate, and really think about what the experience is and when your employees are in the office. I think you can be directive around what days, or how many days they need to be in, and be directive in terms of giving suggestions about here's what you can do when you do there, right? Like this month, try and meet with one new person for coffee. Try and have a team day. Try and have your teams meet with other teams to introduce. We've onboarded so many people during the pandemic. So, for the rest of the year into the first quarter of next year, if you just focus solely on making sure when people came in office there was some directive, some direction, and some budget around hosting people, getting to meet new people, you would be doing a fantastic job.
I just want to add to that, because I know our team, particularly our HR team and this committee that works on this, has been thinking a lot about the things that you, if possible, must do in person. You hire somebody, don't have a Teams call or a Zoom call or on the first day to onboard them. Meet them in the location, show them, get them, and we got out of these habits. A performance review, right? They can be done remotely. You guys probably all did them, had them done to you. I did, but now it's better to get that in-person communication for some of these more intense conversations and important parts of the experience of being in a company. So I think this deliberateness,
Especially if it's not a good performance review.
right? Exactly. It's never happened to me.
Leave someone alone at home.
Yeah. But operationalizing this stuff in hybrid is challenging.
Switching gears slightly, when we're talking about working from home in a hybrid environment, I'm sure many of us are guilty of still working from the kitchen table or the dining room table and don't have proper setups. But I'm curious how important it actually is to productivity and feeling like you're doing good work to have, a functional workspace. Dimitri, is this something that workplaces should be thinking about? Should they be investing in getting this equipment for people if they haven't already 3 years in?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, they need to think about this and just, an understanding. I think this is another area where there's a bit of a disconnect between employees and employers. You touched on this a moment ago, but there is a concern about among 50% who say that if I had to come back into the office, I would be less productive because of the distractions. And employers, I don't think, see that in quite the same light. And I can speak for myself. I called in yesterday to say I'm not coming into the office today. I got to get some work done. So it happens. And the other part that people are really concerned about is losing. Let's be candid about the commute time. That's a big deal, especially for people living in Toronto. It's possibly 1 hour or 2 hours a day. And from a productivity point of view, that's a lot of people are putting that back into their jobs, and that time that people would have been on the road, they're actually putting in time towards the business. I mean, looking at the setup at home, which is the issue at hand, we have 1 out of 4 employees saying that their current setup to terrible. That's a big chunk of people. I mean, a lot of people are happy, but that's still a significant chunk. I think that we have just under half that have a setup at home, which is just like it's their office. Just under half, whereas other people are using some sort of communal space. It's in their kitchen, their dining room, or they're just like finding a place to set up on a day-to-day basis. Interestingly, that stat of just under half people have their own office. It's the same proportion that don't have access to proper lighting, and I think we've done enough Zoom calls to know that we're seeing your basements. We know that you're in your basements and it's dark out there, so you need a lamp. There is a bit of an infrastructure gap, and employers to date are not stepping up sufficiently. So I think 50% of employers are giving some sort of support mechanism. A lot of it tends to be sort of tech peripherals, headsets, an additional screen, that sort of thing. Only 19% are giving some kind of stipend, and of the people that are getting the stipend, only half are saying it's enough to cover their costs. The biggest thing that people are saying that they need, and I think it kind of goes without saying, moving from if this is going to be a permanent thing, and I think the expectation setting is an important part of this, is an ergonomic setup. You can only sit in the dining room table not for the next 10 years of your life, but at some point your back's going to give. And so that's the number one thing that employees are looking for. If they could have anything to their setup, they want an ergonomic chair, an ergonomic desk, and that's already there in the office space. So if employers are concerned about, and we know that their number one concern is attaining and retaining talent, and so that makes it the case that supporting your employees at home is a big deal. This is what they need. They need to feel the support, and they need some investment to show that this is we're going to do a hybrid solution, and we're going to support you where you are, not just in the office.
I got to add to this. So you can appreciate the business we're in. We do a lot of home office setups and corporate office setups. So what's interesting from our point of view is not only are we worried about and thinking through this for our own business, this has had a profound impact on our core business. Like, we provide office products, furniture, et cetera, to home and offices. So we've had this council, and a couple of my colleagues on the panel are part of this council, and we have a productivity expert, an ergonomist, somebody who studies happiness, like trying to help us figure out where is this all going. And so some very interesting things that I've learned in the process, in addition to this type of stuff. Lighting. Like, I had not thought about lighting. Apparently lighting has a direct impact on your mood. Getting the right light, whether it's in your office or on your desk, like, this sounds like very tactical stuff here, but turns out it's actually quite important. I learned from our ergonomist that a lot of people actually have gone out and bought ergonomic chairs. The reality is they don't know how to use them. The settings are wrong. And if you don't get the settings right? And so, of course, we think about, well, can we have a better chair? Could we help our customers set them right? So, like, there's a lot of little things that showed up in the survey that Angus Reid did, that we're seeing out in how people are operating in their environments today that just need to be resolved.
Before I open to audience questions, Charlene, I want to end asking you this. So we're talking a lot about what material items you need: chairs, desks, light. But what also should workplaces consider when it comes to actually having an inclusive hybrid model. So in other words, when they're devising plans, how can they make sure they're equitable and consistent with the actual needs of their workforce?
Yeah, one thing that we when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we talk a lot about race, gender, orientation, indigeneity. We don't talk a lot about disability, neurodiversity. So, kind of first principles, you want to make sure that your workplace is accessible, right? And that also means doing, some type of technology audit to make sure that all of your employees can actually access your tools. The Canadian National Institute for the Blind does great programming on not just what you can do for your workplace, but how to work with clients and stakeholders that suffer from various levels and abilities of sight. We've conducted audits of all of our physical spaces. And as we renovate them, we're including all gender-neutral washrooms. And I think, if you don't have someone like me in your workplace, I think it is worth the time to invest the money to get a third-party consultant to really review your policies and practices and make sure that you're being inclusive on all fronts for the variety of topics that we mentioned here today. My voice is going to give out before we were done this thing. And the other thing I would say, if you haven't done it by now, I would take a look at, for the leaders in the room, the statements your company made in 2020, right? Whether it was after the murder of George Floyd, whether it was after the increase in hate crimes against our Asian colleagues, whether it was after the discoveries of bodies on sites of Indigenous residential schools, and just ask yourself the question, what have you done, right? Again, that's what I referred to earlier. We're in a dangerous time. I don't envy the leaders here today. There's a lot on your plate, right? Whether or not you are affected by racism, oppression, discrimination, you now have to. It's no longer good enough to say, I'm a great marketer, I bring in business, I lead people. Unfortunately, that era is gone. You also now have to have some level of EDI capacity. You have to add those tools to your toolkit in order to lead effectively, because just look around this room, right? We all have, relatively the same hiring pools, right? And that hiring pool is no longer a monolith. And so I would, again, look at your accessibility. I would get third-party outside help if you don't have it in-house. And lastly, I would say with regards to mental health, if you haven't done this already, I think this is another quick and easy win. We have had line items in our budgets pre-pandemic for conferences, travel, in-person events. We didn't spend that money. Take that money and dedicate it to your employees' mental health. It will never be as much. First of all, it's the right thing to do, right? Do it for yourself, do it for your team, and it will never cost as much money as it will cost to lose someone to a mental health crisis or to a place that has better cultural support. We offer a ton of choice when it comes to mental health. We're talking about choice here as a theme. So we've enhanced our mental health benefits. We have different apps that will offer kind of therapy on demand along with our additional benefits. Talk to your EAP. And we also offer it's not an elegant way of saying it, but just cash. Here's a stipend. Spend it on what makes you feel good. Spend it on time with your family. Spend it on camping. Spend it on a trainer. Spend it on therapy in addition to your regular benefits. Really, really lean into some of the costs of operating a business have just shifted, right? That's where you can find those extra resources and pass them directly onto your employees in support of their mental health.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I'm going to open it up to audience questions now. Chantel will have a mic and pass it around, so if you don't mind raising your hand if you have a question. Oh, we have one already, and then.
Thank you. My name's Louisa Jewell. My question is, what would you say is your greatest mental health challenge right now? Specifically, what are employees complaining about the most that you hear about?
I can kick off really quickly. I think one of the biggest challenges for those particularly working in a remote setting is there's no boundary between business and personal. And so I think, while we've gain time, right, from the commute, I think we've lost our ability to transition in and out of work mode. And so one of the things that we started to do with the team, those that are more remote, is set that virtual commute. So what is that 15-minute ritual at the start and at the end of the day to help you transition more effectively? But I hear that that's a core challenge that contributes to burnout, is being stuck in that one mode, which is work 24/7.
So I've done quite a bit of research on burnout and employee well-being, and I echo the boundary issue. In the pandemic, loneliness and anxiety really skyrocketed as well. I've published a couple of papers looking at these things, and one of the things that we find really is that people didn't have outlets the same way in the pandemic, and there was so much unknown and uncertainty and an overload of information, and they couldn't process it. So that's, I think, part of it as well. That goes partly also to the way you communicate with your staff. But the initiatives, I think, is a great point, is that what do you offer them to help them learn how to cope with some of these things in their own time, in their own way as well. And the support. And the mental health question is something that we've become so much more comfortable in addressing in the past decade. So that's a big help, number one. But it's more than just doing the surface stuff to it. It's drilling down, seeing what the core issues are. Do people not understand the boundaries? Are people feeling pressures in different ways? Are they not getting the communication and the interactions with colleagues or leaders that could flag some issues, right, that come up? I mean, if you think one of the big things in the pandemic was the leaders couldn't go by and be like, this person looks like they're struggling right now. And I've got to, maybe help them in some way. Because those Zoom calls would just be in and out and you're done and, screen off. Or screen might not even come on halfway through COVID, right? It was like with just black boxes. And so kind of that connection part was a little bit harder. And so I think that's part of where you have to look at in dealing with some of these issues and giving people the tools. And I had mentioned at the beginning, leadership training, right? Leaders have to have a different toolkit now than they had before the pandemic. And part of that is helping employees deal with some of these issues. And leadership well-being is a big thing because a lot has fallen on leaders' shoulders. So you can't ignore the fact that they're struggling a lot as well.
Just make a couple points. There is mental health training specifically for leaders that your leaders can be certified in. We require all of our leaders to have that certification. The other one trend, I noticed two trends. One, parents of trans children. We don't have children in our workplace, but the trans community had a really, really tough time getting their medical needs met, getting ID, gender-affirming ID, and they were already a vulnerable community before, and that vulnerability was I think expanded during the pandemic. And so I heard from lots of parents of trans children who chose to transition or come out during the pandemic. I would consider bringing in speakers to talk about trans inclusion, trans topics. For our company, what we've done is we started a resource group for parents of trans children. The other thing, it's never, even though we're talking about mental health, it's kind of the only topic we've been talking about since we all got locked in our homes in 2020. It is always, always necessary to talk about create a culture of workplace. You have regular conversations. You can do it during Canadian Mental Health Week about why it is okay to go to therapy. If you have a diverse workforce, you need to recognize that depending on the culture you come from, I'm a first-generation Canadian, depending on the socioeconomic status you came from, all of us have stories to tell, right? Whereas, we go to church, we don't do therapy. Or, my mom was a single mom, we worked hard, we don't do that stuff. Right? Or this is something that's just not done in our culture, right? Everybody has a story that they bring to the table about why they avoid, whether it's therapy, medication, mental health care, right? Really bringing in people to demystify that and making sure that your people know that your healthcare providers that are offered through your benefits are diverse, showing them that and showing, creating a culture where you can have conversations to demystify the fact that for some communities, it may not be okay to actually get help.
Anyone else? We have a couple hands. Chantel, we have multiple hands now. Chantel's going to be busy.
Hello, my name is Karen Eit, and what a fantastic panel. and great conversation, so thank you. It's really been great. As a personality expert for the last 25 years, and a person that's relatively new in Toronto, and a person very outgoing and extroverted and an entrepreneur that took my business into the house from home, and it hasn't worked for me. I'm much too extroverted to be working from my home. So I'm going to make a change to get myself out of the house. So I don't have a question, I just wanted to make that comment, that understanding personalities, because we do all have one, and understanding your people in that new and different way, what they need, what makes them tick, and making them feel really understood is just something I'd like to just suggest as another way of looking at all of this.
I want to add to your comment, and I was going to say it a little bit earlier, and it's been something that's been rattling around in my head as we've been talking about mental health. I think one of the things that we all went work from home, the environment became very unstructured. And we're not done, and we don't know what it's going to be, right? And I think for people that have a huge tolerance for ambiguity, that's fine, right? Okay, if you wake up next week but I think the vast majority of people do not have that level of tolerance. And so I know there's a lot of leaders in this room. I would be deliberate about providing as much structure as you possibly can and visibility to it, and I'm sure we could be better at it in our company. And it doesn't have to be, hey, 2 years from now, this is how it's all going to work. It's going to be, in the next month, I'm going to call you and we're going to do this, and we're going to, just so that people can kind of get all those structural things behind them and focus on the job at hand, which is presumably you have customers and, people you want to serve in your business or your organization, so that all that stuff's behind you. I think it's a great point.
Look, I speak a lot, and so people may be surprised to hear I'm an introvert. And so when I heard about this COVID thing and the lockdown, and I just said, you know what, I have to stay in my house and just be by myself and follow rules. I was built for this. I was born for this. And, early on in the pandemic, my colleagues who were extroverts and really, really fed off and really identified, right, with I work here, this is my desk, right, and this is who I help, they really, really struggled. We had some early retirements. We had some people that just left. And as an introvert, it took me 2.5 years, but I struggled as well. I think a good general rule is if you can, however you can, support your employees' passions outside of work. Encourage people to go out, get involved, whether it's volunteering, if you offer kind of paid volunteer days for your company. The extroverts and the introverts, not every solution is coming to the office and working. Being mindful of supporting your employees, just getting back out there, because a lot of people are still, myself included, are still learning how to do it slowly but surely.
And I think that goes to the point that I was trying to get at earlier, and maybe I didn't make clear enough, is that you have to engage your people, right? You got to know what their expectation is, what they want, what they need, how you can support them. Make them a part of the conversation and a part of the planning, and you'll get a lot more buy-in, right? We know that's change management 101, right? Like get that feedback from people, get that input from them, and they're going to be a lot more supportive of the ideas, because now it's part of their idea. Right? So it's our idea instead of my idea or your idea. And I think that's a very valid point, that not everybody is going to fit the same cookie cutter model that we might want to put on them.
And I'd just like to suggest that even those that are happy to be home and prefer that environment, they don't even realize how much they're missing out by not getting some socialization and contact with the team. Because they do like to be home, but everybody needs it a little, and some need it a lot. So.
One of the most valuable training I had as a manager was exactly what you're talking about. Communication needs, personality needs. That is Myers-Briggs type stuff, which I know is an exact science, but it's a bit of an eye-opener. And I think it's a really good point. Like we're in a moment where we're not exactly sure what the configuration is. There is a negotiation between employer and employee. And yeah, we should keep in mind, introverts versus extroverts, structured versus unstructured. There's all sorts of needs where, if we can figure it out and if we can be flexible enough about it in our approach, then we can find a way to optimize. The other thing to say about the, introverts versus extroverts is that, as you grow in your career and as you mature as a person, you tend to round out a little bit. You tend to be, the introverts tend to learn how to be a little bit more extroverted. The structured people learn to, hopefully you learn to be accept ambiguity a little bit more. So, and that's all part of, a lot of that happens, together in a workplace and through interaction. So, there's a lot of interesting experimentation that's going to happen, I think, over the next couple of years.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have time for one or two more questions. So, Chantel, I saw this. Oh, okay. And that gentleman had his hand up. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name's Abe Dyke. I had a question around, we're talking about the blurred lines between home and workspace, and then WSIB and liability around, now you're providing chairs, and, if somebody is getting off on leave because of a health issue related to, them being at work. How are we navigating that?
Okay, I can't give you legal advice, but I will say, you've got it. It's not that complicated. You should contact your lawyer, and the WSIB is also great help as well. In a non-legal advice, talking about ergonomics and setting up things at home, I think it's just also good to just tell people to be mindful, right? We're kind of, again, as Andrew said, losing that line between work and home. Like, we, throughout the pandemic, we sent out an email. This is if it had a quote or some type of meditation thing on it, it's your 2-minute break. Get up from your desk. Right? I will admit I didn't always take the advice myself. I was one of the people that didn't set up my workstation properly, had cords all over, and I have a broken toe to show for a broken toe from a wipeout I took in my own home. And so I think part of that culture about encouraging your employees, again, technology, whether it's an all teams kind of announcement, taking time, encouraging people to get up, get away from their desk. All of our eyes have gotten, I now have progressives, have gotten worse during the pandemic. Just simple reminders about screen time. It's obvious, but people need those little timed, targeted reminders.
Thank you. Yep, go ahead.
Hi. Thanks. My name is Av, and I actually have a slightly different perspective as a small technology company, and I'd like to get your point on it. So, you talk about mental health and engagement. I actually have a different perspective because I think mental health is related to engagement. So if you're truly not engaging with everyone, you're staring at that Zoom screen with a PowerPoint deck for 19 hours a day, you truly will go batty, right? That's the reality of sensory deprivation. Now, here's the challenge that I see for most companies. I've been in technology for 20 years. I remember when WebEx was not part of Cisco and you had to click through and join meetings. Today, in 2022, we have self-driving cars, but most people go full screen on a PowerPoint deck and they talk for 35 minutes. It's not engaging. Now, on the flip side, you see people like Meta tell you that you're going to wear vacuum cleaners on your face and you're going to be a pink flamingo in space, and we're all going to meet on the metaverse. I don't see any of these things resonating. What do you gentlemen what do you panel, gentlemen, ladies, see as the future of hybrid work? Because it can't be a full screen PowerPoint deck where we just talk each other to death. What's your ideas?
So I'll let the gentleman answer. As the lady on the table, I'll maybe chime in first. Let's talk about what we mean when we say engagement, right? What we're talking about, people who are invested in your in your employees, your firms, or your organization's culture, right? You get engagement. The hardest nut to crack is really engagement, for making people to feel like it's not transactional. I have a role to play here. I'm invested in the health, the wealth, and the future of this organization. And so when we talk about engagement, we talk about people who are going to, we have an ethos, we have an understanding through education about how we treat each other. We understand that the way that we talk to each other every day can affect the lived experience of our colleagues that look different or maybe a different gender than us, right? When we have education on, mental health, diversity, unconscious bias, everybody comes out because we know that this is not more than the file that I have on my desk. This is what we do here, and this is the effect we're having within our organization, within our clients, and within our communities. So when we talk about engagement, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about engaging in a culture. And so if your culture is defined as one person talking at you, looking at a PowerPoint on a screen, then that engagement within that culture, it's not really engagement, it's just, that's why I pay you to be there, right? And that can be harmful. But engagement is just really people, it's something more than how we conduct meetings. I just wanted to clarify that first before we go on to, and I'll let the gentleman speak.
Yeah, as somebody who researches this kind of thing, that's, you're right on with what engagement is. The point of hybrid is not having people sit at the computer screen for 19 hours a day going, listen, be talked at. The point of hybrid is that it should be designed flexibly to give you the best of both worlds, right? We've been there. We've been I spent probably the first year consulting people on how to not have Zoom meetings for like 12 hours a day. Right? It was like, I'm burning out, my employees are all like tired, how do we lead people? Well, don't have a Zoom meeting every hour stacks back to back. Right? That was seemed like common sense. But hybrid is both, right? You're going to have an in-person component. You're going to have a remote component. You've got to make decisions as to where your people are most comfortable, most effective, what's going to lead to the productivity. Part of that is capturing productivity. What does that mean for your employees, for your company? And part of that is then deciding, what are the mediums through which we're going to function to get us to the outcomes that we find critical.
I was just going to say, I think it's about choice, because I think they're not mutually exclusive. You've got everything from in-person in a conference room through to metaverse. And, at Microsoft Ignite, they just announced the integration of avatars within Teams. So now you are able to get this blended metaverse experience in a Teams call. So I think it's choice. I don't think we should force people to work any one specific way. I think that if you're more comfortable on a call or in person or metaverse or conference call, dial-in, I think that's the beauty of technology, is it gives us choice. And that's I think, flexibility, going back to your point.
Well, I'll just say, having that choice is a great vehicle. Like, really leaning into those choices is a great vehicle to get promoted different kind of engagement. Try the Pink Flamingo metaverse virtual headset thing and talk to your people. How does this work for you? How does this work for your work? Try Teams, try Zoom, right? At least Teams, it's very customizable in how you can build out your workspace, right? And all of these companies, Teams, Zooms, have these resources to help your organization. So lean into that choice. Listen to your employees if they come to you with tech solutions, right? I think that's especially with employees of all different ages and tech abilities in the workforce. Listen to them, take their suggestions, and try things. Try things, get feedback, wash, rinse, repeat.
I think that's a great way to end. I know we're at time. I heard empty glasses clanking, so we'll have some networking now. But thank you so much, all the panelists, for joining us tonight. And thank you again, Staples, for being our partner for this really great event. And thank you all for coming out. It was really nice to see so many faces, and we hope that you'll join us again for another panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Great conversation. Have a good night, everyone.